This is Democracy Watch. I'm joined by my co-host, voting rights attorney and founder of Democracy Docket, Marc Elias. So, Marc, we've got a raft of new charges against Trump and his co-conspirators in Fulton County, Georgia, and these charges are unlike any other indictment that we've seen thus far. Does the fact that Trump is contending with RICO charges make this especially worrisome for him? And can you briefly explain what RICO charges are?
Sure. So Donald Trump is in a lot of trouble and he should be very worried. So racketeering was originally conceived of as a way of getting at the mob, but it's much more than that. And it's really much more than that in Georgia. So the theory behind RICO is that there is an enterprise, sort of a loosely defined, sometimes it's an actual organization, but other times it's a loosely defined group of people who have gotten together and have conspired to break the law. So in this case in Fulton County, Georgia, the theory is that Donald Trump, as the kingpin of this enterprise, got together with a whole bunch of other people, some of whom were indicted alongside of him, some of whom are known to the grand jury and are co-conspirators but are not indicted, and they all play a part in this enterprise, in this instance, to undermine and challenge the outcome of the 2020 election through unlawful means.
Now, is the bar higher to prove RICO charges?
Sure. I mean, first of all, you have to prove there was an enterprise, right? You have to show that there was, in fact, this sprawling group of people who were all committed to doing this thing. And then you have to show that they all took acts in furtherance of that enterprise, that racketeering enterprise, to break the law.
Now, if they can't meet the threshold, meet the bar to prove RICO charges, is there still lesser charges that could apply here?
Yeah, so there are still the underlying crimes, right? So think of it this way. It is a crime to lie to a federal court, okay? And so that is charged as a substantive offense here, that Donald Trump and others submitted false statements to a federal court, to federal and state officials. Those are underlying crimes. But they become part of a racketeering enterprise when they are done in concert and coordination with themselves and others. I don't think that the problem in this case, if there is one, is going to be proving a RICO charge. I think it is the sheer size of this case that may prove challenging.
Well, to that point, we saw in the DC indictment, for example, that there was only one defendant, and that was Donald Trump. This indictment in Fulton County has 18 other defendants here, and yet Fani Willis wants to go to trial quickly. How do you square those things? Like, doesn't a sprawling RICO case open the door for huge delays when you're dealing with so many different people?
It can, but I'll tell you, this RICO charge in Georgia has a 5-year minimum, mandatory minimum. So I think you're going to see some people flipping like burgers at a fast food restaurant. So, you know, it's easy to start with 19 people being very brave on day one. You know, let's see where they are a month from now, how many defendants there are. Not a lot of people want to go to jail for Donald Trump.
Yeah, it's a good point. Are there any charges here that are in the indictment that are especially dangerous for Trump?
Yeah, I think some of the charges are almost a lock cinch. You know, we talk a lot about how the Florida case is kind of like pitch and catch on the law. You know, he kept classified documents he wasn't allowed to keep. What the heck is the defense to that? Well, there are some of these charges that actually read like that. You know, for example, as I mentioned, some of the false statement charges, the charges are just the statements were just false. I mean, like everyone seems to admit they were false. The breach of the voting equipment charges, the intimidation of the election officials, you know, those are pretty much not in controversy. So I think it's going to be a very difficult case for Donald Trump and some of the others to contest those facts underlying those charges.
Are there any charges that surprised you that you saw out of this indictment?
I think I was surprised that she weaved into the indictment evidence of wrongdoing in other places, right? So like there's evidence of wrongdoing, of similar wrongdoing from other states, like in Michigan. She included the scheme and the plot to turn the Department of Justice into an outfit that would send false information about voting irregularities in Georgia and weave that in. That surprised me a little bit. I think it's within her purview to do so. After all, that DOJ plot involved Georgia, and the evidence of other states is part of the enterprise. But I was surprised at how broad she went with some of that.
Do you think that a conviction in the DOJ trial could lend itself to a conviction in Fulton County or vice versa because they're interweaved with each other?
Absolutely. So a conviction of wrongdoing in another jurisdiction, in this instance, I'm going to assume, although I heard her loud and clear, she wants her case heard within 6 months. I'm going to assume for a moment that the DC case is the first case to go. I think that'll be the facts. I think a conviction in that DC federal court case, all of that then becomes admissible evidence in the Georgia case.
Now, what could Trump be facing in terms of a prison sentence if he's ultimately convicted? And in your opinion, I know this is all unprecedented, that we haven't dealt with a former president before being indicted in a situation like this, but what is the most likely outcome when you're dealing with a powerful, well-connected, wealthy defendant like Donald Trump?
Yeah, so all of his money and all of his connections are not going to save him from a sentencing judge in Georgia, or for that matter, a sentencing judge in federal court in Washington, D.C. I know that there are lots of people who say, yeah, but there are logistics and the like. Look, there is a mandatory minimum of 5 years if you're convicted of RICO in Georgia, and I don't have any reason to believe that the courts in Georgia would bend that. Just because someone was a former candidate for federal office. And I'll tell you, in D.C., the judge who has the case in D.C. has been a pretty hard sentencer generally, and particularly with respect to the January 6th defendants who have come to her courtroom. And so I would anticipate that if he gets convicted in D.C., he would also face the likelihood of a prison sentence.
Okay. Now, as a lawyer, Mark, what was it like to see names like John Eastman, Sidney Powell, Kenneth Chesebro, Jenna Ellis, and Ray Smith, all Trump attorneys named in this indictment?
Look, there is something fundamentally broken in the Republican legal establishment. I mean, we just have to take a step back and realize this is not normal. These crimes that took place did not happen over the objection of lawyers. They happened because of Republican lawyers. Donald Trump may have been a raving lunatic in the White House, but he did not have the reach to actually commit several of these crimes, or for that matter, some of the crimes charged in the Washington, D.C. case, without the active participation and in some instance, goading and insistence of Republican lawyers. The Republican Party needs to take a step back and ask itself, what did we do that facilitated the rise of Trump and the embracing of the party to become completely taken by Trumpism? But I have to say, the bar has some introspection to do here as well. There is something wrong in the Republican legal establishment, in the Republican bar, that it has produced lawyer after lawyer after lawyer that have played such varying roles, from the sort of kingpin tough guy role of Rudy Giuliani to the faux constitutionalist of Eastman, to the fake electors scheme person, we've to Sidney Powell. Like, we've seen it in various roles and in these conspiracies, but it's really, really troubling, and it is something that the bar is going to have to reckon with, and the Republican legal establishment is going to have to reckon with.
And finally, there have been rumblings that the Trump team is trying to get this thing moved into the federal court system. What would that look like? What's the likelihood of that happening, and why do they want to do it?
So isn't this remarkable, Brian? When they're charged in federal court, they don't want to be in federal court. When they're charged in state court, they don't want to be in state court. I get it. Donald Trump doesn't like the fact that he's been indicted. And he should, rather than spending all of this time figuring out what court to be in, he should hire lawyers who prepare the best defense they can. And that may mean a plea. because whatever court he's in, the federal court in DC, the state court in Georgia, the state court in New York, the federal court in Florida, he's got big problems. I assume they want to move this case out of federal court in Georgia because A, they don't like the jury pool in Fulton County, and B, because he has this fantasy that he's going to win the presidency again, and then he's going to pardon himself. And he thinks that if he's in federal court more places, that'll give him more opportunities for pardons. But I got to tell you, I think this case stays in state court in Georgia. But, if he likes federal court well enough, he can agree to a fast trial in the federal court case in Washington, D.C.
Yeah, and I also think there's, there is the possibility for more indictments in federal court. So if he's that desperate to get back into federal court, he'll have plenty of opportunities and likely more in the future. So with that said, Marc, thank you for the work that you and your team have done to protect democracy across this country. For anybody who wants to help Marc, make sure to sign up for Democracy Docket. It is the free news outlet that Marc founded to keep you up to date on everything voting and elections. The link is right here on the screen. It's also in the post description of this video. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
I'm Marc Elias.
This is Democracy Watch.